Hey y'all, this is the part two of the lecture of Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. This is going to cover pages about 14 through 32, which is the section we were supposed to finish last time and then read today. The overarching idea in this section is how violence is manifested in Black communities and why it's that way and why things seem so different and bad in Black communities compared to white communities. Okay. And the opening pages of this section, what he's getting towards is that the violence that occurs in Black neighborhoods is the result of fear. And this is a fight or flight mentality, right? Deep in our lizard brain somewhere, we are programmed to respond one of two ways to stress or danger. One way is to run away from it, or you can fight it. And he's saying that Black communities had to learn to fight it. And that the violence in their homes and in their streets from each other was essentially training and security so that the fear they felt from the outside world, from the police, from the white community was bringing on them. It's a response to that and a protection against that. And he says that it's a reflection of fear pretty clearly on pages 14 and 15. On page 16, he has the anecdote about when he was a boy and he and his parents, not an ad, by the way. He and his parents went to the park and he kind of wandered off to go find a play area, and his parents couldn't find him and they searched. They finally found him a little while later playing on the playground. And the first thing Dad did was get out his belt. Right. And Dad says, quote, either I can beat him or the police, unquote. And that's a pretty clear, and honest explanation of what this entire section is about. That there is such fear of repercussions from the unknown, from white community that can act in any way at any time without provocation, that the father is going to use this method in order to teach his son, how to act, how to behave, but also how to survive, right? It's not just that Coates ran off from his parents, it's that he was alone, right? If he is with a group of friends, right, or with his parents or with another trusted adult or something like that, it's not that big a deal. But when you're growing up with this constant fear that at any time somebody can take ownership of your body away from you, right? You can lose your body at any point. Then the idea of running off on your own is never a good idea. And so the dad is trying to get that across to him in a way that he's going to remember, right? I don't want to get beat up, so I am not going to do this thing. Page 17, he has, we're going to get into connotation here. He talks about how all of this education left you naked in front of your community, the nakedness, right? Now, on a denotative level, being naked, means without clothes in our bare skin, right? But we have to apply connotation here because nakedness is just a fact. When we think about being naked, and especially about being naked in front of other people, there's typically, this sense of embarrassment, this sense of, being open and exposed, right? There's a fear to it, right? It's not like you just want to be naked in front of a bunch of people. That'd be kind of weird if you wanted to, but, whatever suits your boat. So essentially, figuratively, what he's saying is that the nakedness equals a primal state. You are stripped down bare to who you are. And they were stripped down bare to who they were because they were living in this society, in this area, in this country that keeps taking things away from them without giving them any ownership, right? If I don't own the clothes on my back, well, unless somebody gives them to me, they can be taken any time from me. That person could come back and take them. And then I too would be naked, which is not something you want to picture. So he's talking about this primal state, that the violence and fear they experienced from the outside of their community resulted in that same violence being manifested in their community. And it was a training, right? And he talks a lot in this section about learning the rules, right? Learning the correct nods and waves, how many times you can smile, how many times you can do this, who you talk to here, who runs this crew here, right? He talks about that a lot. And that's just when you get down to, our primal nature, our tribalism, that is how, you have to act. And that is how you survive, right? So this was about survival and keeping out the unwanted group that was the X factor, the one that could, and continues to act without any provocation, that can take ownership of your body at any time they want and have zero repercussions, as he talked about in the first section. Real quickly, on the bottom of 17 to 18, he talks about the wealth gap. So those of you who are thinking about, if we were still doing that final project, if you were thinking about, the wealth gap, he talks about that there are systems in place to protect people who already have existing wealth, but those systems do not apply to people who have no existing wealth and haven't had wealth for a long, long, long time. And the difference, real quickly, there's a difference between wealth and income, right? I'm going to use myself as an example. My wife and I, our incomes combined are pretty good. We should be in a much higher class or society of people than we are in. But we don't have any wealth accumulated. We haven't inherited anything. My parents and my wife's parents didn't really give us anything, right? We have tremendous student loan debt. We don't own a home. Nothing has been given to us. They help us when they can. But for the most part, my wife and I, despite making good salaries, are living in a lower class rank than we probably should. So there's a difference between income and wealth. And in Black communities, there is almost no wealth. In fact, the amount of wealth decreases every year instead of increases. So that's just something I want to talk about. Page 20. He's talking about how media depictions of normal life did not and continue to not reflect the reality that he was living. He talks about how, kids on TV shows when he was growing up, they forgot to study for a test, or, the pot roast burnt. What are we going to do tonight? And that's not the reality of where he was living. And so it was hard. He talks about that divide, and this is where the Du Bois' idea of the veil comes in, right? That realization that there is some sort of division, and he talks about other universes or things being galaxies away, which is the same metaphor essentially. But what is out there is not what is here. And that is so far away or unattainable that it doesn't process, right? So he talks about that on 20. Page 21. He talks about how he felt sad for his son because he realizes that things have not progressed, right? That despite all of the differences between when he was growing up, 30, 40 years ago, and the world his son has grown up in at 15, even though there are all sorts of advances and all sort of progression and all sort of legislation that give the illusion of progression, things haven't changed, right? Black people still are not the owners of their body. And that hasn't changed. It hasn't changed since 1518, through the Civil War, through Jim Crow, through civil rights. It is still the reality, and that's what he's talking about there. Pages 23 and 24, he talks about the law of the streets. And this is essentially the difference between the known and the unknown, right? And this is something that gets into our primal, if we want to break it down into archetypes, this is something that gets into everybody's primal understanding, right? The fear of the unknown is greater than the fear of the known, right? If you know the rules of something and you can predict what is going to happen if you make an action, then the results of that action are not as scary as an unknown encounter, right? Fear of the ocean is something that is, programmed deep within us, right? Because it's something that way, way, way ago, our furthest ancestors, were standing on the ground. They were trying to get a handle on their lives, and they looked out in that ocean and went, oh my God, what is out there? That is scary. We are afraid of the ocean. Same thing with like dark places. Fear of the unknown, right? I don't know what's in there. I don't know what's out there. So it is much scarier than anything I experience here. And he talks about that a lot in this section. It sounds terrible, right? That at any point, he talks about the boy that pulled out the gun at 7-Eleven and pointed it at him and may have pulled the trigger had that other kid's friends not, taken him away. That taught him that at any time, his life could be taken. He can lose possession of his body. But that lesson is that he now knows the rules. If he sees something, he now knows that situation, and it's less scary than driving through a white neighborhood, getting pulled over for a broken taillight, and next thing you know, you're on the ground with a broken arm or something, right? So the fear of the known versus the fear of the unknown, and how much worse the unknown is. Because the unknown, again, results in the potential of losing the body. 25 is when he starts talking about education, and mostly the folly of education. In that, who is education meant for, right? You come to school, you're in a class, you're all in honors English 11. I have 4 sections of it. I teach the same thing to all 4 sections, okay? Because that's what I am told to do. I know fully well that what we are doing, what we are learning, what I am teaching you is not relevant to probably 10 to 20% of you. I understand this, right? But that's what I'm told to do. It is my job. I'm not allowed to just personalize things for whomever. I can give you alternatives. I can create, but ultimately my job is to create a curriculum, justify that curriculum, deliver that curriculum, be here to help you learn that curriculum. Okay? That doesn't work. Right? And especially when you think of what he talked about in the previous 10 pages, that reality of street education, the violence that they face every single day. And he talks about, why was I in a French class? I didn't know any French people. Why is French going to help him survive an encounter that, the language of a head nod or looking at somebody too long could result in a beating? Right? That's true education. But then he says later on that education stops at 17. By about the age of 17, you have learned everything you need to learn from the streets, and there's no advancing. Now you're stuck, right? So there has to be a marrying of these ideals, right? How do you still provide an education that will advance you beyond the age of 17, but still reflect the reality of where you live and keep you safe for now? And I don't know the answer to that. Hopefully somebody at some point figures that out. Bottom of 27, top of 28, he talks about the ground being tripwired, the air being unbreathable, and the water being toxic. He's both being literal and metaphoric at this point. A lot of Black communities have higher rates of pollution than white communities because, The white people in charge will say, yeah, we want this factory, but we don't want it near us. So go put it over there. You can build houses that are going to be cheap to buy or rent, and it's understood that people with a lower degree of wealth who cannot afford to invest in a house in a nicer place that doesn't have these pollution problems, they're going to move there. Right? So he's both being literal and metaphoric at this point. It comes off as more metaphoric, but realize that there is a literal meaning behind this. 29, the Wu-Tang Clan reference. Fear ruled everything around me. If you know your Wu-Tang, Cream, cash rules everything around me. Here, he's coining that. He's twisting it to fear ruled everything around me because we didn't have any money, right? And he talks about that later on in on that page when he's talking about Black education, his grandmother making him do those written assignments. And that it's about self-realization, right? When you understand who you are as a person, why you respond to things, and what you would do in order to change that, like we talked previously, having to adapt and change in order to become a better, exceptional version of yourself. That his education was most relevant when it was about being self-actualized, realizing who he really is, recognizing that he is flawed, recognizing that he is a primal creature, that he's not innocent, as he says, and then thinking, wait a minute, if I'm not innocent, probably no one else is too. I think I'm a good person. I do things, to survive. I do things to make myself better. If I'm doing these same things, then probably everyone else is. And so if the people who are potentially going to take control of my body from me are flawed and not innocent, why do they get to act as if they aren't flawed and innocent? And that goes back to the previous section where he's talking about that superhero mentality, right? If you don't change, you cannot really be exceptional. And then 32, the page that really, really, really is damning is being forced to watch movies or read things about nonviolence, right? And the quote that stood out to me was the glories of being beaten on camera, right? Hollywood, in a weird way, likes to sexualize, and fetishize, right, the noble Black person or the noble Hispanic person or the noble Southeast Asian person who, in the face of extreme violence and prejudice and just the worst things, is able to just stand there and take it. What does that say? What does that say? That is saying that, what the white guy did in that movie was wrong, but you know what? It just happened, right? Oh, it's not me. I would never do that. But that, it just happened. But look at that. Oh, he didn't fight back. He just stood there and he took it and he proved himself to be morally superior. And he is saying, what Coates is saying is, why, if the world is savage and the people who are in charge are allowed to act like savages, then why must the oppressed group be the moral superior? And I think that is an essential question that each and every one of us, no matter who we are, really needs to think about. Because it's something that really made me think, right? We love those movies, we love the movies where, the oppressed person is just, they're not going to give up, and they don't have to fight back, right? And they get their freedom or whatever at the end. Why does somebody have to suffer that? Why can't they fight back? Why do they have to be the moral superior in the face of savagery? And why isn't more made about how savage the oppressor is, right? When is the oppressor's moment of realization? When do they realize that what they are doing is morally wrong and they change? That almost never happens. Anyway, that's the end of part 2. Part 3 will come up next week. Thank you.